Good morning, and welcome to the Daily Signal. I'm Remo, and it's Saturday, June 7th, 2025. Today's news brings us stories from around the globe that remind us just how interconnected our world really is. We're starting with breaking developments from Ukraine, where Russian attacks have once again targeted the eastern city of Kharkiv, killing 3 people. We'll also dive into ongoing challenges in Gaza, where overcrowding has forced a halt to critical aid distribution during the Eid holiday. From there, we're exploring some fascinating international stories, including a dramatic mushroom poisoning trial in Australia that's capturing global attention, and a major cocaine bust in the Canary Islands that involved dozens of arrests. We'll also look at how Trump's travel policies might affect international sports fans and why Greta Thunberg's protest ship is making headlines again. It's a packed 15 minutes ahead, so let's dive right in with today's top story. We begin this morning with devastating news from Ukraine. Russian drones and missiles have struck the eastern city of Kharkiv, killing 3 people and injuring several others, according to Ukrainian officials. This latest attack on Kharkiv, Ukraine's second-largest city, underscores the ongoing intensity of the conflict, even as we're now well into 2025. The city, which sits just 40 kilometers from the Russian border, has been repeatedly targeted throughout this war, making it one of the most dangerous places for civilians in Ukraine. What makes this particularly significant is the timing. These strikes come as international diplomatic efforts continue to search for pathways to peace. Yet the reality on the ground remains brutally unchanged for ordinary Ukrainians trying to live their daily lives. For those of us watching from afar, it's important to remember that behind every headline like this are real families. Parents dropping their children at school, workers heading to their jobs, elderly residents who simply want to live in peace. The human cost of this conflict continues to mount, with no clear end in sight. Staying in that region, we have difficult news from Gaza, where the Israeli Defense Forces have recovered the body of Thai hostage Natapong Pinta from the southern city of Rafah. Mr. Pinta was among the foreign workers who were taken during the October 7th attacks. His recovery brings both closure and renewed grief to his family back in Thailand, highlighting how this conflict has affected not just Israelis and Palestinians, but people from around the world who were simply trying to make a living. The recovery operation took place in Rafah, an area that has seen intensive military activity in recent months. This serves as a stark reminder that the hostage situation remains one of the most heart-wrenching aspects of this ongoing crisis. For listeners who might not be familiar with the broader context, Thailand has a significant number of agricultural workers in Israel, and several were caught up in the October 7th attacks. Each recovery brings families answers they've desperately sought, while also underscoring the human complexity of this conflict that extends far beyond the immediate region. The humanitarian situation in Gaza continues to deteriorate, with overcrowding forcing authorities to halt aid distribution just as families were trying to celebrate Eid, one of Islam's most important holidays. Think about that for a moment. Imagine trying to celebrate Christmas or any major holiday in your culture, but being unable to access basic necessities because of overwhelming crowds and logistical breakdowns. That's the reality facing families in Gaza right now. Reuters reports that the violence has continued even during what should be a time of celebration and family gathering. This creates a particularly cruel irony. Eid is traditionally a time of charity, community, and sharing meals with loved ones, yet the very systems that provide aid have become overwhelmed. The overcrowding at distribution points isn't just an inconvenience, it's dangerous. Desperate people waiting for food, water, and medical supplies can create situations where the very aid meant to help becomes a source of additional risk and trauma. This situation illustrates one of the harsh realities of humanitarian work in conflict zones. Good intentions and available resources aren't always enough when the infrastructure for safe distribution simply doesn't exist. Now, let's shift to a story that reads like a mystery novel but is playing out in Australian courtrooms. Erin Patterson, the woman at the center of what's being called Australia's mushroom trial, has told prosecutors that a lunch she prepared was meant to be special. This case has captivated Australia and much of the world because of its unusual nature. We're talking about a family meal that allegedly turned deadly due to poisonous mushrooms. Patterson is accused of serving death cap mushrooms to her guests, resulting in multiple deaths. What makes this story particularly intriguing and disturbing is the suggestion that this wasn't an accident. The word special takes on a very different meaning when you're talking about a meal that allegedly killed people. For those following this case, it raises fascinating questions about intent, knowledge, and the fine line between accident and deliberate. Death cap mushrooms are notoriously toxic and can be mistaken for edible varieties, which is why many countries have strict guidelines about foraging. This trial is expected to continue for weeks, and it's becoming a landmark case in Australian criminal law, with implications for how we understand domestic violence and premeditated harm. Back to Ukraine, where President Zelensky has revealed fascinating details about a recent drone attack on Russian territory. He says the Russian drivers involved in the operation didn't know anything about their role in what he's calling an audacious drone attack. This is espionage-level stuff, folks. We're talking about Ukrainian forces apparently using unwitting Russian drivers to help position or transport equipment for drone operations inside Russia itself. It's the kind of operation that highlights just how sophisticated and creative military tactics have become in this conflict. What's particularly striking is Zelensky's willingness to discuss operational details publicly. This suggests either that the operation is completely finished or that revealing these details serves some strategic purpose, perhaps to demonstrate Ukraine's capability to strike deep into Russian territory or to create doubt and paranoia among Russians about who they can trust. The use of unwitting accomplices raises ethical questions about warfare, but it also shows how modern conflicts blur the lines between military and civilian involvement. These Russian drivers thought they were doing ordinary work, but they inadvertently became part of a military operation against their own country. Here's a story that perfectly captures the tensions between politics and sports. Trump's travel ban policies are creating an interesting paradox. Athletes from affected nations can enter the U.S. for the World Cup and Olympics, but their fans might be stuck at home. Imagine training your entire life to compete on the world's biggest stage, making it to the Olympics or World Cup, and then realizing that your family, your friends, the people who supported you through years of struggle can't be there to watch you compete. That's the reality facing athletes from several nations affected by these travel restrictions. This creates a particularly American dilemma. The United States has long prided itself on hosting international sporting events that bring the world together. Yet these policies mean that while we'll welcome the athletes, we might not welcome the fans who would normally travel to support them. Sports. Economists point out that international fans are crucial to the success of major sporting events. They don't just buy tickets, they book hotels, eat at restaurants, and contribute millions to local economies. So these restrictions don't just affect the fans, they could impact the financial success of these events. It's another example of how immigration policies have consequences far beyond the political sphere, affecting everything from family reunions to global sporting spectacles. Environmental activist Greta Thunberg is making headlines again, this time for a high-profile protest ship headed for Gaza that has prompted the Israeli Navy to prepare blocking actions. Thunberg, who became famous for her climate activism as a teenager, has increasingly focused on what she sees as interconnected global justice issues. Her decision to support this maritime protest represents a significant expansion of her activism beyond environmental concerns. The Israeli Navy's preparation to block the ship sets up what could be a dramatic confrontation at sea, reminiscent of historical maritime protests and blockade-running operations. These kinds of standoffs often become major international incidents, regardless of their original intent. What's particularly interesting is how Thunberg's involvement brings global attention to this protest in a way that might not have happened otherwise. Love her or hate her, she has an undeniable ability to focus international media attention on issues she cares about. This also highlights how modern activism increasingly crosses traditional boundaries. Climate activists, human rights campaigners, and political protesters are finding common ground in ways that would have been unusual just a decade ago. Political drama is unfolding in Poland, where a former president is demanding an election recount after a candidate with anti-Ukraine positions won a significant victory. This is causing serious concerns among Poland's allies and within the country itself. Poland has been one of Ukraine's strongest supporters throughout the conflict, providing military aid, humanitarian assistance, and serving as a crucial transit point for Western support. The victory of an anti-Ukraine candidate represents a potential seismic shift in regional politics. The demand for a recount suggests that this election result was either very close or very surprising, possibly both. In Poland's political context, where support for Ukraine has generally enjoyed broad consensus, this outcome could signal significant changes in public opinion. For those following European politics, this development is particularly concerning because Poland sits on the front line of European support for Ukraine. Any weakening of that support could have cascading effects throughout the region and potentially impact the broader Western response to the conflict. The international implications are huge. If Poland, one of Ukraine's most reliable allies, shifts toward a more neutral or even pro-Russian stance, it could fundamentally alter the geopolitical landscape of Eastern Europe. In a more unusual story, North Korea reports that it has successfully raised a capsized destroyer and is continuing repair work. While this might sound like routine military maintenance, the fact that North Korea is publicizing it suggests there's more to the story. North Korea rarely announces military setbacks or equipment failures, so the fact that they're openly discussing a capsized destroyer raises questions about what happened and why they're telling the world about it now. This could be an attempt to demonstrate military capability, showing that their navy can recover from disasters and maintain operational readiness. Alternatively, it might be preparation for requesting international assistance, though that would be unusual for North Korea. From a strategic perspective, the condition of North Korea's navy is significant for regional security. Their naval forces are generally considered less advanced than their missile and nuclear programs, but any improvements could affect the balance of power in Northeast Asian waters. The timing of this announcement, coming amid ongoing tensions with South Korea and the United States, might be intended to project strength or to signal that North Korea remains a formidable military presence despite economic challenges. Finally, we end with a major international law enforcement success. Spanish authorities have arrested 48 people in what they're calling one of the largest cocaine trafficking operations ever uncovered in the Canary Islands. The Canary Islands might seem like an unlikely hub for international drug trafficking, but their location off the coast of Africa makes them a natural stopping point for drugs moving from South America and West Africa toward European markets. This bust involved an international cocaine gang, which means we're talking about sophisticated criminal networks with operations spanning multiple continents. These aren't small-time dealers. These are organizations that move tons of cocaine worth hundreds of millions of dollars. What makes this particularly significant is the international cooperation required to pull off an operation this size. Spanish authorities almost certainly worked with law enforcement agencies from multiple countries to identify, track, and ultimately arrest these 48 individuals. For European drug policy, operations like this represent both success and challenge. While it's great that authorities disrupted this network, it also highlights just how sophisticated and persistent international drug trafficking has become. And that brings us to the end of today's Daily Signal. Looking across today's stories, there are some clear themes that emerge. We see the persistence of conflicts in Ukraine, in Gaza, that continue to shape international relations and human lives. We see how politics and policy intersect with everything from sports to environmental activism, and we see how global networks, whether they're moving drugs or coordinating military operations, continue to challenge traditional boundaries and national sovereignty. Perhaps most importantly, today's news reminds us that behind every headline are real people dealing with real consequences. Whether it's families in Kharkiv living under the threat of missile attacks, Olympic athletes wondering if their loved ones can watch them compete, or communities in the Canary Islands dealing with international crime syndicates, these stories ultimately impact individual lives in profound ways. That's what makes staying informed so important, not just to be knowledgeable about current events, but to understand how our interconnected world affects all of us, regardless of where we live. Thank you for spending these 15 minutes with me today. I'm Remo, and this has been the Daily Signal. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from around the world. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and take care of each other.